I don't know what it is about characters that have shadow powers, but something about them is just so cool. I mean, you have Blackbeard, Shikamaru, Yami, and funny enough, Tokiyami. But today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be focusing on Rouge from Fairy Tail, one of the twin dragon slayers from the Saber-Tooth Guild. And much like their name suggests, usually you can find Sting and Rouge together, which is why for today's video, I've teamed up with Sage D Samurai to help me out with not only this video, but to even let me hop on his own What If Deku was Sting's reincarnation. So after you're done with this video, go check out his as well. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, like the video, share with a friend, turn on post notifications so you never miss a video, and enjoy. You know, it's not often that I record a video and I realize that the beginning or intro to my story doesn't actually make a lot of sense. So for the first 2 minutes of the story, I'm gonna just need you guys to turn your brains off, because if you don't, there will be a lot of comments down below being like, hey, this doesn't add up. Okay, so just let's turn our brains off. Okay, for some of you guys that have seen Fairy Tail and know most of the lore, it pretty much ends up being revealed that the Dragon Slayers were from the past sent into the future in order to defeat Acnologia. Now, I'm going to be taking that concept and pretty much making it work so that in the sense, the world of Fairy Tail is the world of My Hero Academia. But what happened is that as magical energy began to basically become less and less, people ended up eventually developing no magic, and population with no magic ended up being just a normal occurrence. But one day, the baby with the light, he had a power similar to Sting's, right? Where he had light coming off of him, but because his magic was so weak, that's all he could muster. And that's where quirks come from in a sense, right? Now, getting into where in the world Deku comes from, in this timeline and events, he's still going to be the son of Inko Midoriya and Hiyashi Midoriya. Unfortunately, he's sent to the future because he is a dragon slayer, right? And so in this universe, we're pretty much going to be taking a character that doesn't belong here, that's going to look like Deku, kind of be like Deku for the beginning, but it's really just kind of going to be Rouge. Yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of having a bit of a hard time explaining this, but just know Deku is going to be in this world somehow. I don't know, dude. I almost feel like restarting the recording, but it's just bro, I'm not about to do that. So anyways, Izuku was teleported into the world of My Hero Academia, into the timeline right during the modern age, and he would be there the same year that Izuku Midoriya would usually be born. However, in this timeline, Izuku's going to be trained and raised by the Shadow Dragon. So for those of you guys that have seen Fairy Tail, much like Natsu's childhood, he would pretty much be raised out in the wilderness with very, very scenic views, and he would learn English, or technically Japanese, from this dragon, who would teach him how to ride and all this stuff, but he wouldn't exactly be too proficient at these things, much like Natsu was, in the sense that he's kind of going to be sharing a lot of parallels to the childhood that Natsu has, just because we're aware of some things about Sting and Rouge, but just not enough to be able to formulate an entire backstory or why they ended up being the way that they are. So because of that, I'm just kind of going to take a lot of liberties from the Natsu story that we know of, and we're just going to be rolling with that. And when it comes to what's going to be happening during these years, I can't really think of anything too crazy to specifically talk about, because obviously Izuku's definitely going to be learning shadow dragon slaying magic, and because of this, he's going to be having all the abilities that Rouge has, also going to be having a lacrima implemented inside of him, just like Rouge does in the original Fairy Tail story. Also, before I keep going, can we just talk about how unbelievably sick the Grand Magic games were? It was just unbelievable. The way that Natsu came in and just started absolutely whooping Sting and Rouge, who were supposedly the strongest dragon slayers ever or something like that. Dude, that was just so sick in my opinion. But yeah, moving on. If I don't start the story now, I'm never going to start it. So sorry for all the yapping, boys. But anyways, Izuku, like I said, he'd be trained until the age of 9 and he'd be raised by the Shadow Dragon, right? Until one day, much like with Igneal's case, he would end up basically putting himself inside of Izuku so that he doesn't turn into a dragon himself. If you're not a Fairy Tail watcher and you don't really get what's going on, pretty much Big Dragon trains young Izuku, teaches him a bunch of little cool powers and attacks, and eventually disappears. That's the best way I can summarize everything. Eventually though, after this would happen, Izuku would go off in search of his dragon friend, but he just straight up cannot find him. Oh, and for those of you guys wondering why I'm not giving the dragon an actual name, it's because if I'm being completely honest, I can't even pronounce the name that he has. Like I just can't, all right? I can't, all right? So yeah, we're gonna be rolling with that. He would try to survive on his own, finding the dragon and eating whatever he can, but eventually this would lead him to being kind of malnourished and struggle a lot in the wilderness, basically doing his best to catch fish and find clean water as much as he can. One day, however, throughout all of this, he would finally end up stumbling across a really strange looking egg. This egg is massive, mind you. And so Izuku, seeing this egg, would pretty much take it and honestly want to cook it. But before he can finally start cooking it, he would get so tired that he would just lay on top of it and begin to pass out completely. As when he wakes up, he would have a green cat right next to him. Now obviously this is an Xehther, or more specifically, the one and only legendary Rouges. So Izuku, from the point that he would be a little kid outside in search of a shadow dragon, he would finally end up running into his best friend for the entire series, which is going to be Rouges, which if you guys haven't seen Fairy Tail, I'm telling you guys, you're missing out just because of Rouges. He's the most adorable, cute, innocent Xehther you will ever see. And by that, he's basically just a cat with wings, all right? He can fly. And not just fly, but very fast, or at least I assume he has wings. I'm not actually entirely sure if he does or doesn't, but I'm just assuming that he has that ability because every Xehther has it, even though we haven't seen them use it. But yeah, that's besides the point. Point being, eventually Izuku, trying to survive on his own alongside Rouges, realizing that he's not able to provide everything that they both need, decides that he just has to give up in the search of finding his dragon. And so he would finally end up making his way towards the city, where once he would end up making his way there, he would end up encountering a gigantic villain attack. Now, because this villain would be going crazy in town and would be using his fire quirk to pretty much shoot a bunch of projectiles at the direction of a building and some heroes that are trying to stop him, Izuku would make his way towards a store owner before trying to ask him like where exactly they are and where he can find, you know, someone to help him. But in the midst of doing this, Rouges would be outside and would actually end up wandering off into the street, which would lead to Rouges being head to head with this gigantic villain, like this massive 7-foot dude who has a fire quirk that's not as strong as Endeavor and definitely not as powerful, but he has like a very like decently potent quirk for a random street thug, you know what I mean? Which would ultimately lead to Rouges starting to tremble before this dude. But as that's happening, Izuku being inside the store and realizing that Rouges is scared and whoever this guy is about to attack his best friend, he's not having any of it. The moment that he sees that, he would immediately close his eyes before breathing in and letting out the biggest shadow dragon roar he could muster, causing the villain to be sent crashing into the building, knocking him unconscious, as Izuku from here would quickly rush towards Rouges, asking him if he's okay. As right after this would happen, people would begin to actually clap it up for Izuku, who they notice is in complete tatters, like his shirt is kind of ripped up and dirty, and his pants, well, you know, they're pretty bad too. Rouges, on the other hand, is kind of just there, like just happy, as eventually some minutes would pass and the police would finally make their way towards Izuku, as they would end up questioning him and telling him that he's so cool for that, saying that he's going to become a great hero one day, as after Izuku would pretty much be found out that he has no parents and he doesn't even know where he is, the police would actually end up taking him to the station, where Izuku would actually begin to be questioned by a police officer with a quirk that actually serves as a lying detector. He can basically tell you if what someone's saying is true or false. And so that's exactly what they would do with Izuku. They would ask Izuku if he has parents. He would say no, he doesn't. He doesn't even remember where the one who raised him is at. And then the guy would be like, that's true. As you know, they just proceed to ask him a bunch of questions, and they would ask him what kind of quirk he has. As Izuku would say he doesn't know what that is, but he has shadow dragon magic. As from here, you know, the guy would just be like, true, I don't know what that is, but he's not lying. As they would be like, oh, that's probably just what he thinks quirks are. You know, he's probably not from around here. As Izuku would say that he was just looking for somewhere that he can sleep or maybe eat. because he's really hungry. At this moment, his stomach would start grumbling, and the police officers, seeing that they're over here literally questioning a kid like this, would finally all just kind of back up and bring him some Chick-fil-A, as Izuku would just sit there and eat his like 12-count nugget meal with fries. And Frosh would have like a fish given to him, as he's over there enjoying his tilapia, right? And so what would pretty much end up happening after that is that Izuku would then begin to be questioned by a pro hero. Now, this pro hero, no. Nezu, let's say Nezu comes in, right? Because they don't know what else to do with the kid. He's so strong that they don't exactly want to send him into an orphanage, and they want to make sure that he turns into a hero. So because of this, Principal Nezu, the leader of UA High, wanted him making his way into the room and pretty much offering Izuku a place to sleep at, all the food he could ever want, and all of his expenses completely paid for, all in exchange for training him to become a pro hero. So Izuku, hearing this offer, would be like, I mean, what do I have to lose? So he quickly goes on to accept this, and even though he doesn't know what heroes are or how this society functions, throughout the next course of a bunch of years, Izuku would end up learning about pro heroes. He fixes up his language, he fixes up how bad he was at writing and reading, and he learns math and all of these things. So as much as you would think that Izuku would just be training this whole time, Izuku's actually learning how to fit into a normal society, kind of being sort of like a Starfire character in the sense that everything is just so strange. He's like a fish out of water, right? And so over the course of a bunch of years, Izuku would not only train at UA's facilities, destroying a bunch of robots, but would also train alongside Aizawa, with Aizawa being his favorite person to be around, considering the fact that he's just so chill and laid back. So Izuku takes a massive liking towards Aizawa, and Eraserhead would actually end up teaching Izuku a bit about fighting styles and stuff like that, which would lead Izuku to actually implement Aizawa's scarf technique, which he would learn in a couple of months, and it would show that Izuku was extremely adept at learning these things. But not only would he learn things like that, but he would also further his mastery in shadow slaying magic, considering the fact that by the time that they found him, this version of Izuku would have been like 9 years old. So he had about 5 years to do as much training as he possibly could alongside the heroes, and Frosh at this point would already have gotten his adorable frog onesie that he has in the anime. And so this would pretty much lead to Izuku growing up with more of an Eraserhead-esque type personality, where he's kind of closed off, and he sort of has that rogue personality where his personality can come off as rude or like he doesn't want to talk to people. So a lot of people just judge him before they get to know him. So Izuku kind of just becomes distant from people, realizing that he's going to become a hero because that's honestly just going to be benefiting him. And that's how he's able to make a living and keep his best friend Frosh to have the best lifestyle that he can possibly offer him. And so because of this, Izuku would grow in power, in stature, and in magical ability as the years would go by, and never become too cocky, just because of the fact that Frosh was always at his side to always bring Izuku back down to earth. Because after all, that's his best friend. Izuku could not love Frosh anymore. So by the point that we begin the anime, Izuku would already be as powerful as Frosh is by the time of the Grand Magic Games, which is just absurd. Literally absurd. And so we would finally make our way towards the day where the UA entrance exam would happen, meaning that by now Izuku's 14 years old, and he would be pretty much told by Aizawa that for this year, they're actually going to be having him demonstrate to the students what it's going to be like to face off against these robots. Like you guys know in the anime, when they were showing everybody the difference between 1, 2, and 3, as well as 0 pointers, they were just like pictures of these robots. This time, instead of just doing that, Principal Nezu would actually put like 10-second video clips of Izuku destroying these robots with different attacks, with a Shadow Dragon Talon, a Shadow Dragon Fist, stuff like that, and finally a Shadow Dragon Bellow, as it wouldn't be like the same as a roar, but it's like he kind of just lets out a yell kind of that shoots the dragon back, right? And so this would ultimately lead to everybody being like, wow, these things are so strong, as finally someone speaks up from the crowd, which would be Bakugo going, that's cool and all, but what about the 0 pointer? That thing looks to be bigger than everything else. You guys gonna show us that or what? As from here, President Mike would go on to say that the 0 pointer doesn't really matter, considering that it is worth 0 point, telling them to just avoid it and that they didn't feel like destroying one for the purposes of this. As Bakugo would be like, figures, saying that he's gonna absolutely show them how a real pro does things. Like, thinking in his head that he's gonna outdo whoever that was that did the demonstration. And so as Bakugo's thinking that, Ida staring at him would proceed to stand up in front of everybody, just being like, hey, have some respect, we're in UA, you know, just talking, as finally everybody would make their way towards the robots section of the exam, taking the test, and everything would go down just like you would expect. However, this time, when the 0-pointer would actually be released and everybody would begin to start running away from it, Izuku, who would be in the room alongside Nezu, noticing that the 0-pointer had actually caused some rubble to fall on a girl, would quickly exit the room, as Nezu, turning towards that camera, would be like, well, I guess we don't need to save her, he's gonna do that for us. As, you know, Nezu would just pretty much tell the heroes to just watch how this guy, you know, jumps into action. So the heroes that are there watching the future generations of pro heroes go, like, take the entrance exam, would all watch as Izuku would make his way out there and instantly go into his shadow form as he, you know, pretty much just travels through the ground, making his way towards the rooftop of a building. And as the 0-pointer inches closer and closer and closer, Izuku quickly just breathes in and proceeds to let out the most massive shadow dragon roar that there's ever been, as he would just annihilate the 0-pointer standing there. And this would lead Uraraka to look up in shock, as half of the 0-pointer's torso would have been blown to smithereens. This would leave Uraraka to finally use her quirk to remove the rubble off of her and make her way to safety. After this would happen, all the pro heroes who are watching would all be impressed, specifically the ones who have never seen Izuku in action before, but the other heroes who have actually known Izuku are all kind of just like, huh, looks like the kid's grown a lot stronger since the last time. And Nezu would say that by all accounts, he would probably be a top 10 hero, if it weren't for his age and the fact that he still lacks a bit of maturity and a cool temper. As Izuku would finally walk inside of the room staring at Nezu as he just stays quiet, making his way towards the front, just sitting back down as Frosh would be there waiting for him, telling him that was so awesome. As from here, Izuku would smile, as after all that would take place, we would finally get the first day of UA High. Everybody would make their way inside of the classroom, and Izuku would be sitting towards the back of it, just silently having his head down, as he's just waiting for Aizawa to finally wake up and start the class. So, as Izuku would be in the back of the class, annoyed at the fact that Frosh wasn't allowed to come, Izuku would go on to pretty much just ignore everyone and everything until finally Aizawa would tell them to make their way outside, put these on, and do this quirk apprehension test. This would lead to Aizawa pretty much calling Izuku up to the front, before then telling everybody to watch him carefully, that he's gonna perform every single test and to do their best at each one. And so Izuku would kind of grimace at this because he wasn't told that this is how it was gonna go down. So Izuku would do a very, very lazy job at this because honestly, he kind of just wanted to go home and hang out with his buddy Frosh. So right after this would happen, Izuku would impress everybody with the exception of Bakugo, who once again would find himself scoffing, going, can't wait to show all these extras how a real pro does it. As from here, Bakugo goes on to actually exceed Izuku in some of the tests a little more than Deku, just because, I mean, like, let's be honest, Deku wasn't actually even trying for most of these, plus his shadow slaying magic wouldn't exactly be perfectly fitted for stuff like this, so, you know, he does alright, but he doesn't really care, because at the end of the day, he got to go hang out with Frosh. And so, right after all that would finally happen, Izuku would find himself in his own room, watching a bunch of movies with Frosh, as they'd be watching a horror movie and Frosh would be hiding under the cupboards, with Izuku laughing at him, with us seeing a whole different side to Izuku than everybody else gets to see. With everybody else, he's kind of cold and is a man of few words, but with Frosh, Izuku can just be himself, he can laugh, and he can just express himself in a way that he doesn't feel like he can with everyone else, because at the end of the day, people don't understand him, they don't get him. But Frosh, he's been there since day one almost, so Izuku knows that he can trust him with anything. And so we would finally have a little bit of a time skip to the first day, official day technically, you know, that's not true, it's like the second day of UA High, where we would finally get the event of the 2v2 battles, or the hero training, right? As All Might would be introduced to the classroom as one of their teachers, leading everybody to get extremely excited. I mean, like, bro, it's not every day that the #1 hero, the person you've probably been admiring since you were in diapers, comes in and tells you that he's gonna be training you. Bro, that's like if you're a boxer and Rocky offers to train you, Mike Tyson offers to train you, you know what I mean? Like, That's the kind of stuff that's going on right now. So everybody's freaking out, and eventually they would make their way outside, where all of them would end up pulling ballots deciding who's gonna fight who and what the teams are gonna be comprised of. Finally, Izuku makes his way up to the classroom, as he would end up drawing the name Uraraka as his partner. And so Uraraka makes her way towards him before then, asking him a quick question, saying, "Hey, was it you that saved me on that day?" As Izuku, seeing this, he'd be like, "What are you talking about?" And she would say, "The entrance exam. There was a large shadow thing that came flying, and I wasn't sure what it was, but that was you, wasn't it?" As Izuku would look at her and just nod, as Uraraka would smile, saying, "I thought so, I just wanted to..." But Izuku would kind of walk away before she could finish that sentence, and Izuku would kind of just sit there being like, "Let's just get this over with." As finally, because not only is Izuku kind of just annoyed because Izuku knows he could be out there just taking villains out and he just thinks that this is beneath him, but also he would much rather be doing different things with his time. This is not helping him. This is not training anything for him. He's a guy who already knows quantum physics and they have him in an algebra class. You know what I mean? He feels like he doesn't belong here with these, excuse my Bakugo, extras. So as soon as everything would begin, Izuku would be told that he's going to be playing the part of a hero. So Izuku finally would be a little happy at that, seeing that he finally gets to, let loose a bit at least against some of his new classmates, seeing what these other pro heroes have. And so his opponent would be Katsuki Bakugo and Tenya Ida. As soon as everything would be announced to begin, Izuku would turn towards Uraraka, asking her what her quirk is, as she would go on to say that her quirk is gravity. Izuku would ask her a couple of questions about the quirk before then just kind of going silent and sensing that Bakugo was approaching quickly. So Izuku, quickly taking note of this, would rush towards the direction where he knows Bakugo's gonna come out of, turning into a shadow state. As Bakugo turns the corner, Deku would come right out of the shadow before then punching Bakugo away with the Shadow Dragon slaying fist, sending Bakugo crashing into the wall, as he would look back up only to see Izuku wiping the blood off of his face, saying, "Not bad." As from here, he would shoot an explosion towards the direction of Izuku, as he would dodge out of the way quickly, and he would begin evading each and every single one of Bakugo's blows, with Izuku thinking to himself that this kid's actually not as weak as he thought he was going to be. As from here, Bakugo would go on to pretty much just start disrespecting Deku, making a bunch of ill-advised comments at him, saying that he's weak and that he can't wait to show everybody in the class that he's the top dog. As Izuku, hearing all this, would just kind of be mildly annoyed, but it'd be at this moment that Bakugo would be like, "Why you not taking me seriously? You thinking too much about that dumb cat of yours?" As from here, after Izuku hears that, he's like, "Don't talk about him." But Bakugo, realizing that that clearly got under his skin, would proceed to just dig deeper into that comment, being like, "What? Don't tell me you're getting offended over some mutant green cat." As from here, Izuku, after hearing that, is just not having any of it. As from here, Izuku quickly proceeds to go back into the shadows as Bakugo begins to look around at his surroundings, being like, "Hey, show yourself, coward!" As Izuku, quickly jumping out of the shadows, would proceed to grip Bakugo by the face, slamming him into the wall, as his hand would have turned into like a shadow dragon talon, and it would grab the face of Bakugo as he slams him deeper, staring right at his eyes, as in this moment they would have changed color from their usual black to red, as he would tell him to never again utter any disrespect towards Frosh. Got it? As he would go on to punch Bakugo square in the gut, causing Bakugo to become unconscious, as Izuku from here would just walk away, as Bakugo would have fallen onto the ground, slumping over in defeat, as, everybody watching this would just be like, "Dang, that guy is so strong." As from here, they make their way towards Ida, and because Izuku was already in a foul mood and he didn't want to be here, he would just quickly blitz Ida, making his way towards the bomb, placing his hand on it, as immediately over the intercoms you would just hear, "Hero team wins!" As after all this would happen, he would make his way towards the rest of the class, where they would begin to congratulate him, saying that he did such an incredible job. As from here, he would say it wasn't a big deal, he was just weak. As he walks off and makes his way towards Frosh, where he begins to just chill, right? But before he could actually do that, as he makes his way towards Frosh, just walking towards him, who was finally now present, because Frosh kept bugging Aizawa about it, he would finally grab onto Frosh, as Frosh would walk right alongside Izuku, as you would hear the tiny little footsteps, and Uraraka, seeing that, realizes that he's not as mean as he appears to be. he has a soft spot for whoever this little kitty is, and she finds it cute. As before Izuku can walk off, she would say, "Hey, before you go, I just want to congratulate you for your victory. I know I technically won as well, but at the end of the day, you did do all the work." As she scratches the back of her head, and head, and from here she would proceed to thank him. As from here she goes on to explain that she's happy that he's in her class and that she likes him. You know, as from here she would immediately blush. She's like, I didn't mean it. Like, as from here Izuku blushes as well for the first time ever, being like, wait, what? You know, as Frosh catches a quick glimpse of this, and she's like, I didn't mean about it like that. I'm sorry. As she just walks away, and this would just stun Izuku as well as Frosh, who's like, hey, she likes you. That's the first time I've heard that. As from here, Izuku would tense up once more, and right after that would happen, we would have a regular day of school where all of them are told to, you know, pretty much sign off on these permission slips to make their way towards the USJ event, right? Everybody would obviously do so, and we would just time skip straight to their way there. You know, they're all on the bus, and Izuku and Uraraka would pretty much be the last two to get on the bus. Izuku would be, you know, like the first to last, first to last, and she'd be like okay. So say there's 20 people, Izuku's 19, she's 20. So he sits right in the back, and Uraraka, you know, seeing that there's really no other seats left, would actually go on to sit next to Izuku. And it would be like super tense because like they're both sitting next to each other. Uraraka's red in the face, and people noticing this would be like, hey, you know, like, what's up with those two? As Mina would say, she totally has a crush on him. As, you know, Uraraka's like, no, I know. She begins floating in the bus, and from here Roche would be like, it looks like we're getting closer, Izuku. As from here, Izuku, you know, he can't even hear Froze. Right now, he's still in the middle of like being like, okay, like, I've never been in this situation. Hero work, I can handle. Explosions, I can handle. People who have the capabilities of creating an earthquake and like destroying like half a city, I can handle. But girls, I can't. As from here, you know, he's just like blushing and stuff like that. And finally, the girls would like just continue pressing him about this as he just gives them death stares. And they all shut up as they finally end up arriving at the USJ, where eventually Kurogiri would end up making his presence known, teleporting everybody away. As Izuku, not realizing that this was an actual villain, would think, oh, you know, this is probably just part of the activity. And so as he would get teleported away, he would be like, okay, like, what's up with this? Sensing a bunch of villains and ominous intent nearby, because, you know, that's just one of those things you can kind of have a feeling of. Like, you don't need special powers to know that stuff ain't right, you know what I mean? Like, stuff ain't adding up. So Izuku, realizing that he was separated from Frosh and that Frosh was currently like, he straight up can't protect himself, Izuku just quickly proceeds to make like fast work of all these villains in the boat section, just destroying each and every single one of them so quick that they barely had any time to react. As Izuku blitzes towards a bunch more villains, just absolutely destroying them, almost Madara style. As finally he would be face first with the Nomu and Shigaraki, as the Nomu gets up in front of him and Shigaraki says, "Nomu, kill him." But before the Nomu even gets a chance to throw one single blow at Izuku, not having the time of day for this thing, would proceed to use a Shadow Dragon punch, like an iron fist, you know what I mean? Just slamming it straight into the stomach of the Nomu, causing a gaping hole to appear, as the Nomu would fall onto the ground with a roar, as Izuku makes his way towards Frosh, asking him if he's okay. And right next to Frosh would be Uraraka, who says, "Don't worry, I was taking care of the little guy while the purple guy was teleporting everyone away." And at this point, Ida's already left to make his way towards the other stuff, and Aizawa's already down there facing off the bench against a couple of villains, right? From here, seeing all this happen, Shigaraki would pretty much tell the Nomu to get up, as it would, and he would tell the Nomu to go kill that brat once more. As the Nomu, getting up after that blow from Izuku, which Izuku thought he straight up killed that thing, would blitz towards his direction, punching at Izuku, who barely dodges it, because granted, he had already left his guard down, because, you know, not only was he in front of Frosh and he had thought that the villains were taken care of, but he was in front of Uraraka, who kind of at this moment still makes him kind of nervous because of the weird stuff that's been going on. Like, bro, I don't care how much aura you have, how cool you are, when stuff like this happens, you get a little weird, all right? I don't want to hear it. So anyways, Izuku from here would go on to pretty much just relax, like I said, and the Nomu would come in punching him as he misses, but actually ends up hitting Uraraka, who places her hand up, and this would cause her arm to get broken, as it would pop out of her socket, and she proceeds to be sent flying. As Izuku seeing this, the one person who's been nothing but kind to him this entire time would become enraged. So he would turn on his Shadow Dragon mode immediately, as instantly his eyes would both turn red, and you would just see this ominous shadows like coming off of him as he proceeds to let out a big roar, which would annihilate the Nomu out of existence, leaving only the feet behind, as everything from the Nomu's legs to the torso to the head would be swept away. And Kurogiri, seeing this, would instantly try to teleport himself and Shigaraki away, but he would fail, because Izuku in this moment was currently sucking Kurogiri into him. He was literally absorbing him for more magical energy, because Kurogiri, I'm not gonna lie, he kind of looks like he's made out of shadows, so we're gonna be going with that. And he would proceed to almost straight up destroy Shigaraki by literally eating him. But Kurogiri would barely manage to scrape away by the hair on his chinny chin, as he would proceed to teleport himself and Shigaraki away, leaving Izuku standing there angrily, as he would quickly rush towards Uraraka, seeing if she's okay, as she would clearly have one broken arm and be knocked out. And finally, he would end up like seeing if, she's okay. After a couple of minutes would pass and they would wake her up and she'd be in the ambulance. Izuku would ask her if she's okay, and she's like, yeah, thanks for asking. I think I'll be fine. As she like tries to move her arm, but she's just like, she lets out a whimper, As from here, Izuku seeing this would just think to himself that he promises that whoever that was, he's gonna destroy them. As from here, they would have approximately 1 week off of school, as eventually they would return, and Uraraka would end up pretty much having a cast on her arm. It'd be like a really cool little pink one. And, much like happens in high school and middle school, everyone starts signing our cast, being like, can I sign it? Can I sign it? And at the end of the day, Izuku had been the last one to sign. So with that being the case, and with the bell finally ringing and most people leaving the classroom, she finally walks over to him, knowing that, he's kind of shy, or not shy, but he doesn't really care much for people. So she finally walks up to him and says, hey, do you mind signing it? And so he does. He signs his name. He's like, Rogue, get better, as, Uraraka says, thank you. And then she's like, oh, everyone left. Do you mind walking home together? As Izuku, he's like, sure. And from here, Frosh would kind of just be walking right next to them, as it would be at this point that, she's just like, so where do you live? As Izuku would go on to say that he actually lives at UA. And she's like, oh, that's really cool. Are your parents paying for that? With Izuku just feeling like, I don't have parents. I never met them. As from here, she'd be shocked, being like, so were you always raised in UA? That's kind of strange. I've never heard of that. And Izuku would say that actually he was raised by the Shadow Dragon, saying the name of it, as she'd be like, you what now? As he proceeds to explain his backstory, and she would just be stunned, as she would then just go on to say, well, thanks for walking me home. You're a really nice guy when you're not being too quiet. As from here, she would go on to give him a big smile and say, I'll be rooting for you at the festival. As Izuku would blush mad hard and would be about to say something, but he just can't muster to say it, and the door would finally slam, as Izuku would just kind of stand there silent, making his way home. As this, ladies and gentlemen, is where I'm going to be passing the microphone to the legendary Sage the Samurai. Guys, after this video is done and after you guys finish listening to his portion of the story, let me know what you guys think about him. Let me know if you guys want him back on the channel, and also go check out some of his My Hero what ifs as well as his Naruto. Genuinely, you guys know this, I would never have someone on the channel unless I like them personally, and I've been watching this guy's videos, and let me tell you guys, they're bangers, so go check them out. But with that being said, Sage, feel free to take the stage.
Yo, what's good everyone, it's Sage. I just want to say thank you Xehther so much for giving me the opportunity to participate in this part. As now with that being said, I don't really want to yap out to y'all too much about me or myself, so why don't we go ahead and get started into the story, as we're now going to be entering the very next main event, this being the UA Sports Festival. So we now entered the events taking place at the UA Sports Festival with Deku and the rest of his class, as it was supposed to be nothing more but a typical day of studying, as they had to sit there through Aizawa's boring lectures, or at least boring to Deku since he already knew this stuff and way more. But you see, by the time it was finally at the end of the day, and as everyone was preparing to leave, this is when suddenly they would then see that their class would then be blocked by a bunch of students, as these students came from other classes wanting to see exactly what is the big hype behind Class 1A, as they especially wanted to know exactly what happened to them after the USJ incident. Now this will cause many of them that were in class to feel a little bit intimidated by this, except for Bakugo, as he ends up telling all of them to shove off, as he ends up going off on his own. Now this will cause many of them to be angry, and one of them even tries to pick a fight with Bakugo, but Bakugo is just dismissive, insulting all of them straight to their faces, as basically he ends up commenting that all of them are just mad that they're not in Class 1A, as many of them will begin to glare at him angrily. And Deku, seeing that all of them had their attention on Bakugo, he would then try leaving as well. But you see, right before he leaves, he would then try to do something that was out of the norm, as he then sends a glance at Uraraka, who was still there watching him leave, as this is when he then tries to send her a wave, just trying to let her know that he acknowledges her. And Uraraka, seeing this, would then smile as she then gives Deku a wave, causing him to then blush, as any type of cool exit that he was trying to do kind of went out the window as he tries to get out of there awkwardly as possible, although Uraraka chuckles mentally. But you see, as Deku was leaving though, this is when suddenly someone would then spot him, as this person would then bump right into him, as he would then apologize. "Oops, sorry about that. I guess I might have tripped on something," the guy would say, as the guy would then be revealed to be none other than Monoma, as he'll be from Class 1B, and if you guys don't know, which I'm pretty sure you guys do, he's basically the guy who very much just hates Class 1A. As he ends up trying to act all coy and everything about bumping into Deku, but this is when, as Deku will look at this guy dismissively, he will then walk away and then suddenly mutter something, with the words that Deku say actually reaching Monoma, whose eyes widen, as Deku just calmly tells him, "Next time try to act as if you're not trying to bump into someone," as those will be the final words that Deku would say to Monoma right before he leaves, as Monoma will be there just frozen in place, as he couldn't believe that Deku had caught him. He knew that he was trying to bump into him intentionally. And this will cause Monoma to get pissed off by the way that Deku had said all of this very dismissively, like he didn't care about Monoma or what he had to say or really anything about what he did. As Monoma will grit his teeth and clench his fist while glaring at Deku's direction as he ends up leaving, not at all looking back once. As this were for the next following weeks that go by, we will then see Deku and the rest of his classmates then train up for the UA Sports Festival, before eventually the day itself would then arrive. As now, turning to the event, we end up seeing a stadium packed filled with people, as many will wait on in anticipation for the matches that are coming, as they can't help but wonder who exactly is going to win it all. As now, turning to the booth, we will then see both President Mike and Aizawa, as they'll be there ready to comment on any of the events that are going to be taking place. But you see, we would also see someone else along with them, this being none other than Rouges. As yes, you see, the thing is, because Rouges is not going to be the one participating in this exam, and because Deku did not want to leave him by himself unprotected in the stands, this is when Deku would then actually ask Aizawa if he could watch over Rouges, to which Aizawa would agree to this, obviously, as Rouges is actually comfortable in Aizawa's presence. So yeah, he's basically up there in the booth, watching on at everything in amazement, as he will be of course cheering on for Deku, hoping that he wins it all. And speaking of Deku, as we now turn our attention to the waiting room, we would then see him just casually being there waiting for the sports festival to begin, but while he was waiting there, this is when he would then be approached by none other than Todoroki, as this is when Todoroki would then declare a challenge to Deku, saying that he's going to be the one to beat him. With this declaration surprising everyone as they all look on in shock at basically seeing the two strongest members of the class now ready to duke it out at this sports festival, until Bakugo would then intervene, letting them both know that if anyone was going to win, it was going to be him. As now the three-way rivalry to see who's the strongest one in class would then begin at this very moment, but the thing is, Deku was not really that hyped up for it at all. And the main reason why is because of the fact he knows he's going to be able to take care of both Bakugo as well as Todoroki. As honestly, he was just waiting for the sports festival to end so that way he can go back to hanging out with Rouges. But you see, just as Deku was thinking about all the things he could do with hanging out with Rouges, this is when suddenly he would then look towards Uraraka as he ends up seeing her actually shaking a little bit. As you see, by this point now, her arm has healed up after the punch from the Nomu, but you could see that she was still feeling quite nervous about the whole thing. As you see, she wasn't exactly fully confident in her strength just yet, and the worst that she wanted to do was simply not make an impression at all. And seeing how nervous she was and seeing that she was basically quite shaken up about the whole thing, this is when Deku, in a very contrast to his character, would then suddenly end up approaching her. Now, this ends up catching the attention of everyone, to which Deku sends them a glare, letting them know to mind their business, to which they do so, as this is when Deku would then give Uraraka a pep talk, letting her know that he has full confidence that she'll be able to pull it through. With this response from Deku causing Uraraka to shake away her nervousness, as she sends him a smile, thanking him for the vote of confidence, before suddenly doing something very bold, as she then grabs Deku's hand before suddenly shaking it with a firm look on her face, letting him know let the best man or woman win. As she says it all with a smile on her face, All the while Deku would be there blushing at the physical contact, since he was already not too used to it when it comes to people that he's not close with, and he was most definitely not used to it when it came to a girl like Uraraka, as this would cause him to, stammer and everything, as people could swear they could see smoke flying from his head. But before Deku could, fully pass out and everything like that, this is when suddenly the announcements would then be heard, telling them all that the UA Sports Festival was now going to begin. As we now turn to the event. So now turning to the very first part of the event, this is where we end up seeing that it will be none other than the obstacle course, as President Mike will be there explaining in detail about all the things that they need to overcome before finally letting them know that it was finally time for them to start. Now immediately people begin to make their way through it, but we will see that the main ones that end up catching the attention of everyone will be none other than Bakugo, Todoroki, and Ida? As there will be something very weird going on, as up in the booth we will see Frosh as he ends up looking around with a frown on his face. Now as I was seeing this, we'll begin to ask Frosh what was wrong, to which Frosh would then respond with by saying that he can't see Izuku anywhere. And this will cause Aizawa to then get up as he decides to look around himself, only to see that yes, indeed, Izuku is not anywhere near the entire obstacle course. In fact, it seems as if he was not even part of the running at all. But this only begins to beg the question, where exactly did he go? As now, turning back to the events that are happening at the obstacle course, we will see the rest of the students as they try their best to overcome every last one of the obstacles, as they try using various ways in order to overcome them, before eventually it will be finally time for the minefield, as we end up seeing that in the placements it will be Bakugo in first place, Todoroki in second place, and Ida in third place, as it would actually seem as if Bakugo was going to win. Now Bakugo throughout the entirety of the obstacle course had been wondering exactly where Deku ran off to, but he decides to just ignore it as he already sees that he's going to win it all, and besides it's far too late for Deku to do anything about it. As he ends up laughing as we see Bakugo right about to cross the finish line, until something shocking would then happen. As suddenly, a hand would then emerge out of Bakugo's shadow, grabbing his face before suddenly pushing him back. As this is when Bakugo would then hear a monotone voice speaking to him. "Hey, thanks for taking care of the obstacle course for me. That would have been a hassle to get over with." As this is when Bakugo then realizes who it is, as he curses in his mind. As suddenly, passing Bakugo and actually being the first one to cross the finish line will be none other than Izuku Midoriya. As this shocking turn of events would end up catching everyone in the stadium off guard, before suddenly they would then begin to rain the entire stadium with cheers, as they could never had predicted this. As turning to Deku, this is where we would then see the entirety of what he did then play out. As we now end up doing a flashback, as we now turn to the very beginning of the obstacle course. As you see, right before the obstacle course would then begin, we will see Deku use his shadow manipulation in order to enter inside Bakugo's shadow, basically using it as a way of transportation, allowing for Bakugo to do all the hard work, all the while Deku would just be there sleeping and relaxing, waiting for Bakugo to finish up. As right before he would cross the finish line, that's when Deku would then decide to act, as he basically ends up taking away first place from Bakugo's hand, making him do all the hard work but never gaining the credit. As due to that, Deku ends up getting first place with low difficulty, all the while everyone else would just watch on in pure amazement. As soon following Deku would be Bakugo in second place and Todoroki in third, as both of them would be shocked as well as glaring at Deku for his cheap tactics, with Deku not saying anything else, as after all, what does he need to prove to them at all? As Deku would be there leaning against the wall waiting for everyone else to pass the finish line before eventually the obstacle course will then come to an end, as this is where we will now move into the cavalry battles. Now for the cavalry battles, we will see Deku as he'll be awarded with 10 million points right off the bat due to his victory in the obstacle course. Now this will make him a prime target for everyone, as all of them are now gunning for him. But Deku doesn't seem to care at all, as after all, he just wants this day to end so that he can go back to hanging out with Frosh. But as Deku was in the corner just thinking about all the things he could do with Frosh and everything, about how they can go get burgers or go get ice cream, this is when suddenly he would then be approached by Uraraka, as this is where she begins to strike up a conversation with Deku's calm composure breaking. As both of them begin talking with each other, with Deku trying his best to, calm himself down and, to be cool and everything. And so eventually this is when Uraraka would then ask Deku if she's allowed to team up with him. With Deku, of course, blushing once again as he then agrees to it, as after all, he pretty much likes Uraraka much more than everyone else. And just thinking of that thought process would cause Deku to once again blush even further, as you could literally see steam begin to build up through his entire head. But soon he's able to calm himself down, as this is when suddenly another girl would then intervene, this being Hatsume, as she ends up firmly declaring to Deku that she's going to be the one to team up with him in order to show off to her sponsors. As after all, since Deku has the most amount of points, that means he's going to get the most amount of attention. Now Deku tries to deny this as he does not want anything to team up with Hatsume, but unfortunately she was very stubborn. And before Deku can really get into the terms of arguing with her, this is when suddenly an announcement would then ring out, letting him know that the cavalry battle was now going to begin. We end up seeing everyone as they get into positions as they prepare to gun for whoever's team that they're aiming for, with Deku's team currently right now being in the corner of it all, with Deku sighing since unfortunately Hatsume was part of his team, and overall she gave them a bunch of her devices in order to show off to the sponsors, to which Deku was very adamant in his mind that he's not going to be using that. And you know what, lo and behold, he sticks to that promise. As since the very beginning of the cavalry battle, as soon as immediately everyone charges for Deku's team, this is when suddenly Deku then tells them to hold their breath, as suddenly they'll then sink into their shadow. As just like that, every one of the teams would be so caught off guard at this moment, since remember, Deku's team was at the very edge of the arena, as this ends up causing many of them to have no choice but to force themselves to stop, only for some of them to get sent flying due to the sudden stopping momentum. Now this ends up causing many of the teams to look around before they eventually see Deku's team once again, as he'll be now on the other corner of the arena, as he's just waiting for them in anticipation. Now he would ask Uraraka if she was okay, since after all, to Deku, traveling through shadows is very easy, as after all it's like breathing air, but to the rest of them he was unsure. Now Uraraka tells him that he's fine, but you could tell that she was a little bit shaken up by it, but not because it was scary or anything like that, it just felt as if she was like literally swimming in like deep waters pretty much. Like her body felt way heavier, but she was still able to move. And when Deku ends up seeing how she was able to quickly calm herself, this would cause him to be even more impressed with Uraraka, as this is when, right before he can really get to complimenting her, this is when more teams would then rush at him once again, as Deku sighs, telling them all to tense up, as he would then once again travel through shadows. As for the rest of the cavalry battle, we will see Deku just continue doing this tactic, as he ends up leaping from shadow to shadow, going to every corner of the arena, as the other teams are just simply not able to keep up with him. Bakugo will be trying his best, especially as he continues using his explosions to fly around, trying to hit Deku, only for Deku to dodge out of the way, slipping into a shadow and then going to the other corner, as he'll be moving so fast that no one is able to catch up to him. As this will continue on until eventually it will be finally the end of the cavalry battle, as Deku still had his 10 million points headband around his head, allowing for him and his entire team to move on to the finals. And along with him would be Bakugo's team, Todoroki's team, and in this timeline, Monoma's team. As you see, after seeing that he couldn't keep up with Deku's team, and after seeing how Deku was able to take care of multiple amount of different classmates while not even lifting a finger, this would cause Monoma to then gain an idea. As instead of copying the most powerful quirks and just facing them head on, this is when Monoma then decides to use his brain, as he ends up copying different quirks that are meant to push back enemies and causing them to fall out of the arena, or just simply he's able to steal away their headbands without too much difficulty. As due to this will allow Monoma's team to gather enough points to actually make it to the finals, unlike in the main timeline. As this is where we now finally turn to the 1v1 matches, with the very first match being none other than Deku versus Monoma. As now turning to the waiting room before the match, we will see Deku as he'll be there just getting everything ready, drinking some water and just taking his time with the whole thing. But while doing this is when Uraraka would then approach him, wishing him luck, as Deku ends up blushing a little bit, telling her thanks as she ends up leaving, waving goodbye, all the while you could see that right as she was leaving, you could see that she was also blushing as well. As this will be a very small yet wholesome moment, as we end up seeing Deku then leave the waiting room, but as he was leaving, this is when he would then bump into Monoma. As Monoma ends up apologizing, saying that he lost his way here, as he ends up chuckling once again, but Deku could already tell that this guy did it on purpose. He didn't know what exactly this guy's obsession was, but this man just seems to have like an axe to grind with everyone in Class 1A, including him. As this is when Deku would then completely ignore Monoma, as he just decides to make his way to the arena, all while Monoma would be there just casually standing right in front of the waiting room, but you could see that he would have a very unhinged smile on his face, as he already knows that this match was his. Or at least that's what he thinks. As now turning to the match itself, we will see Deku as he'll be facing off against Monoma, as President and Mike would be there announcing both of them about their status, achievements, and basically everything about them. But as he was listening off everything, this is when Monoma then tells Deku that he's actually very surprised by how far he made it, especially since Deku just seems like the type that wouldn't give any effort whatsoever. And Deku already knowing that Monoma was just talking about this in order to insult him, this is when he would then suddenly end up approaching him, ready to knock him out as quickly as possible. As Monoma continues going on this whole spiel and everything about how Deku and the rest of Class 1A are just a bunch of uptake arrogant pricks, this is when after he sees Deku is in distance, he would then smirk. as he then rushes at Deku, throwing a punch with Deku just casually dodging out of the way and kneeing Monoma in the gut. As Monoma ends up jumping back a little bit at the surprise blow, this is when he then smirks, telling Deku that he's not going to get an opportunity like that again, as this is when Deku then swings his fist with Monoma then trying to do something. You can see him gain a look of concentration as he tries to activate something, only to then be surprised as he would then get punched in the face, then knocked down to the ground. As he begins to look down in confusion before suddenly he would then be grabbed once again, getting brought up, as this is when Deku then begins to deliver Monoma the beatdown, just trying to get this over with as quickly as possible, as Monoma will get tossed around like a ragdoll, getting sent flying from different parts of the arena, as Deku is making sure to try to get him out as quickly as possible with Monoma hanging on for dear life. But you can see that he was very much confused and distressed, as after getting sent flying for now the 15th time, this is when Monoma would then shakily get up, as you can see that he was literally near the very edge of the arena and was literally about to fall out, as Monoma would then suddenly scream at the top of his lungs, "You, just what the heck are you doing? You filthy cheater!" Monoma would shout, as this would cause Deku to then stop moving, as well as the rest of the crowd to then grow silent, as they wonder exactly what he was talking about. As this is when Monoma then begins to go on a whole rant, as we now do a little bit of a flashback. Now you see, right as Monoma had bumped into Deku at that very moment, Monoma had decided to use his quirk, this being the ability to copy the abilities of other quirks. As after seeing how well Deku had performed just by using his quirk in the cavalry battle and in the obstacle course, Monoma thought that by copying Deku's ability that he would have an easier time throughout the entirety of the UA Sports Festival. But to his surprise though, even after getting a clean contact with Deku and even making sure that he did activate his quirk to copy Deku's ability, he would then be surprised to see that he just simply is not able to use it at all throughout the fight. No matter at which point he tried to activate it, it just simply didn't work. As the first time Deku would actually end up landing contact with him, he couldn't activate the ability. The first time Deku would throw him around, he couldn't activate the ability. As throughout the entirety of the fight, Monoma had been trying his hardest to activate the ability, but it just simply didn't work. And finally, now getting tired of not being able to do anything, this is when Monoma then decides to release everything, as the only logical conclusion that he can come up with is the fact that Deku was cheating, and that he probably tricked his way into Class 1A. Now this will cause many people to look appalled and surprised, as many of them begin to send disgusted looks towards Deku, as Deku will be on the receiving end of many judgmental eyes, all the while he would react with a simple bored expression. As Monoma continues going on his rant, cursing out Deku and just cursing out Class 1A, as by this point now this entire match has been nothing more but just pushing his mental capacity to the limit. And Deku, seeing that Monoma was not going to stop anytime soon, this is when he would then finally get festered up about the whole thing. As moving so fast that Monoma couldn't even react, this is when Deku would then suddenly gut punch him so hard that he gets sent flying out of the arena and crashing onto a wall. As Deku would just calmly look at him before speaking. "You talk too much," he would tell Monoma, as just like that, this is when Midnight would then suddenly shake away from her shock, as she would then announce Deku as the winner. Now instead of the regular rounds of applause and cheers, you could see that most of the arena was pure silence, as only a handful of people were cheering for Deku, as Deku would end up leaving the area. With this bringing an end to his match, as now we can now continue on with the rest of the battles. Now for the rest of the fights that end up coming up, we will see them play out pretty similar to the main timeline, including the fight between Uraraka and Bakugo, as unfortunately for Uraraka, she's just simply not able to keep up with Bakugo's raw power, as Deku would be there watching the entire fight, gripping the railing as he ends up glaring daggers at Bakugo, as he couldn't believe just how brutal the man was, even to a girl who was trying her best. As this is when, after seeing how Uraraka fell unconscious as Bakugo would then be declared the winner, this is when Deku would then suddenly vow that he's not exactly going to let that slide, as he promises himself that he's going to teach Bakugo a lesson that he's never going to forget, while sending him one last glare. As this is where we now turn to the very next match following right after that, this being Deku's match against Todoroki, as we now turns towards it. Now we see Deku in the waiting room, as he'll be currently right now getting ready for his next match, as he was just trying to get it over with as quickly as possible so that way he can face off against Bakugo. Now he was not exactly sure why he was feeling this type of anger for someone that was not Rouges, but yet at the same time he just simply couldn't stop himself. As just remembering Uraraka's face after seeing how Bakugo had destroyed her strategy, this will cause Deku to once again feel anger, as he vows that he's going to finish this match as quickly as possible, not sparing it a second. But as Deku was walking out though to take care of Todoroki, this is when suddenly he would then encounter Endeavor. As Endeavor then begins to spout a bunch of nonsense to Deku, letting him know how strong he really is, and telling Deku that he'll be used as a way to push Todoroki to grow even stronger, so that way he could surpass All Might. And Deku would just be there trying to ignore whatever Endeavor was yapping about, before finally he ends up just fully leaving Endeavor there, ignoring his presence completely as he ends up making his way to the arena. As Endeavor would be stunned by this as he ends up glaring at Deku, already muttering about disrespectful brats, and already knowing that Todoroki was going to show him a thing or two. Or at least, that's what he thought. As we now end up turning to the very match itself, as we now see the very beginning to both Todoroki facing off against Deku, as Midnight will then declare the match to begin. As we end up seeing the fight first start off with Todoroki sending a ginormous wave of ice towards Deku, with Deku just watching it approaching him with a bored expression before suddenly he would then vanish. Now Todoroki's eyes would then go wide as he looks around, only to then feel a presence behind him, as he ends up hearing Deku's monotone voice speaking to him. "Sorry about this, no hard feelings or anything, I just really want to take care of the blonde prick from earlier." As just after saying these words, as Todoroki then turns to see Deku, this is when he would then be punched in the face, as he ends up getting sent flying nearly out of the arena until he eventually ends up catching himself with some ice, preventing himself from falling out of the arena just in time. But you could see that he was a little bit dazed from the look, as he ends up seeing Deku approaching, as he could swear he could see two of them. As this is when Deku then begins to rush at Todoroki with amazing speeds, as Todoroki ends up acting quickly. Using his eyes, he tries to form multiple barriers between him and Deku, but yet Deku's able to easily just maneuver out of the way of every last one of them. Before eventually he would then grab Todoroki by the scarf of his shirt, as he would then begin to push Todoroki out of the arena, with Todoroki trying his best in order to get rid of Deku's grip on his shirt, but unfortunately it was all pointless, as whenever he tried to freeze Deku's arm, Deku would be able to use his magic in order to break out of it. And whenever Todoroki would throw a punch at Deku, Deku would seem completely unaffected, as it really seems as if this was going to be the end for Todoroki's run in the sports festival, as he couldn't believe that he's going to go out in the most humiliating way possible. But just as he was thinking this, as his emotions would reach an extreme point, this is when Todoroki's flames would then begin to act up, causing Deku to then finally release his grip on Todoroki's shirt as he ends up getting some distance. And Todoroki, seeing how the flames protected him, this is when he begins to feel some type of way about it, as he once again activates them, looking at them mesmerized, as he just wonders if just maybe, possibly for just one time ever, could these flames actually do something for him besides bringing him emotional pain. As once again remembering everything that happened between Endeavor and his mother, and remembering about the scar that he has on his face, this will cause Todoroki to then soon take a deep breath as he buries him away for now, focusing at the fight at hand. As for the first time ever, Todoroki would then willingly use his flames, as he uses them to heat up his body and causing him to be able to generate much more ice with less problems. As ginormous waves of ice and flames would be there surrounding Deku, as this is when Todoroki then tells Deku that he's going to win here and now. And Endeavor seeing his son go all out and using his flames, this is when he would then begin to cheer, or he's talking a bunch of nonsense about Todoroki acknowledging his destiny, with Todoroki ignoring him. Now for Deku, as we now turn our attention to him, you would think that he will show some type of outward reaction to all of this. But the thing is, Deku wasn't. He wasn't showing any reaction at all. Although mentally he was impressed with Todoroki's growth of strength, unfortunately right now he didn't really care too much about it since he had his own objective in mind. This being the fact that he was here to face off against Bakugo. So with that thought in mind, this is where both Todoroki as well as Deku would then launch their final attacks at each other, as Todoroki would then tell Deku that this was going to be his win, with Deku saying nothing more. As instead, he would actually suck up a generous amount of shadows in the entire area, as this is when he would then begin to release the attack, as a way of showing respect to Todoroki. As both of them would then release their final attacks, with Todoroki sending a generous wave of ice and fire directly at Deku, with Deku finally releasing his own attack. "Shadow Dragon's Roar," he would say mentally, as he would then release a generous stream of darkness from his mouth, with this stream of darkness immediately absorbing both the ice and flame, as it would then approach Todoroki at rapid speeds, with Todoroki not being able to do anything. And yet, even being faced with certain defeat, Todoroki would still have a generous smile on his face, as he ends up getting hit with the attack and gets sent flying and crashing into the arena walls, causing even more damage, as everyone would look on in bated breath. As finally, by the time that the smoke would then finally release, this is when it would then be revealed that Todoroki was now out of bound and also unconscious, as Midnight would then declare Deku the winner. Now, unlike in the last fight where only a handful of people would clap for Deku, in this one, half of the arena would clap for Deku, with the other half feeling quite suspicious of the child, as after all, now seeing that Deku was able to beat the son of the number 2 hero, they begin to once again feel very skeptical about his whole abilities. And let it be known now that Deku is literally unknown to these people, like they don't know any information about him. He's just some random kid that came up in here, and yet this random kid is able to beat the number 2 hero's son, as this immediately caused them to wonder if maybe all this was rigged, or maybe if that Monoma kid was right. As Deku would once again be on the receiving end of judgmental glares, but he doesn't say anything else, as he just calmly returns back to his waiting room, preparing for the next match, which was going to be him facing off against Bakugo, as we now end up doing a little bit of a short time skip. As finally, after so many battles and after facing off against so many obstacles and challenges, this is where we would then finally get the match that we all been waiting for. This being Bakugo facing off against Deku. As the two of them will be staring down at each other, as Midnight will be going through the whole routine of talking about the rules before eventually she would then see that none of them are really caring about what she was saying. As she ends up sighing once again in boredom but also in excitement, this is when she would then announce the fight to then begin. As immediately, without any hesitation, this is where we would then see Bakugo as he then rushes at Deku before trying to throw an explosion directly at his face. But the thing is, Deku is able to dodge out of the way relatively easily, as instead he ends up catching Bakugo's arm mid-air as he ends up flipping Bakugo over, causing him to land on the ground hard and causing him to lose air in his lungs. As he tries to recover from it quickly until suddenly he would then see Deku is still holding onto his arm, as this is when Deku would then toss Bakugo to nearly outside of the arena, as everyone would look on in complete shock until Bakugo was able to recover, although you can see that he was quite dazed from being, tossed around like that. As he tells Deku that was not going to happen again, but Deku was not speaking to him, at all, he was definitely silent. Now, this will cause Bakugo to be even more pissed off, as he then rushes at Deku once again, as he throws explosion after explosion, but yet Deku is just avoiding them all, treating them all as if it was nothing more but a joke. As this will cause Bakugo to have no choice but to gain some distance, as tensing his arms up extremely to the point where it will be painful. This is when he would then release a ginormous explosion, as this explosion will be very similar to the one that he released during the time of the battle trials, as everyone will look on in bated breath wondering if Deku was going to be alright, but this is when Deku, instead of showing any outward reaction, once again he just continues on with a blank expression, as he's able to completely annihilate the attack with using a little bit of his Shadow Dragon Slayer magic. As this will cause everyone to be once again off-putted by everything that happened, as Deku sighs, as he ends up telling Bakugo that he just simply doesn't learn. As this is when Deku would then enter into his Shadow Drive. As this will surprise everyone, as Deku's body would then begin to have dark energy surrounding it, as he seems to look much more wilder compared to how he looked before. And now Bakugo seeing this, as he ends up remembering the events that happened at the USJ, this will cause him to then tense up, as he then prepares to face off against Deku, only to see that he had long disappeared. As he looks around, only to then get gut punched, then punched in the face, then kicked, as this is when Bakugo will be on the receiving end of nasty barrages, as Deku seems as if he was teleporting throughout the entirety of the arena, as Bakugo will be dragged through the dirt, tossed into the air, slammed hard into the ground, as he couldn't do anything. As Deku was moving at speeds so fast that many people were having a hard time, including pro heroes when it came to keeping up with the fight. As Deku will be doing all this as a way for getting revenge for Uraraka. As by the time that Deku was done with his onslaught of barrages, you can see that Bakugo was literally damaged. This man had a bruised eyes, he can barely see, and overall he just seems to be standing on his last legs. As Deku would then suddenly grab Bakugo's arm that was very weak at the moment, as he would then toss Bakugo up in the air. As he asked Bakugo how did it feel, but Bakugo, after getting tossed up in the air, then smiling, as he then tells Deku that he's feeling just fine. As suddenly, using the momentum of himself getting tossed up in the air, this is when Bakugo then begins to release his explosions, with them growing more and more powerful as he ends up spinning his body rapidly. As this is when Bakugo then begins to descend down to the ground like a drill, as he ends up screaming out the words, "Howwinds Impact!" As this would be Bakugo's ultimate move, as he ended up using the momentum of Deku's throw along with his explosions in order to create his most deadly move. All the while, Deku would just be there with an impassive look on his face as he just calmly raises one hand into the air. As this is where both Deku and Bakugo would then collide with each other, causing a ginormous amount of destruction to occur as a ginormous amount of smoke begins to fill up the entire arena. as both Midnight as well as the Mentos then tried their best to keep the situation calm, as they tried their best to defend the civilians from all the rubble that was getting sent flying everywhere. As everyone would look on in bated breath as they wonder exactly what was the outcome of the battle. But you see, as they were watching on in complete suspense, this is when they would then get to see something shocking. As casually, once the smoke would then finally lift up, this is when it would then be revealed that Deku had been able to stop the Howitzer impact with just one hand. As Bakugo would be casually just there, as he would still be up in the air, but he could just be shown having a shocked expression on his face, as one minute he was spinning as if he was like a Beyblade, and in the very next second he would then suddenly stop. As Deku had been able to stop him with just one hand by grabbing Bakugo's head, killing the momentum of the Howitzer impact. As Bakugo would be there just wondering how the heck did Deku do it, this is when suddenly he would then be tossed hard into the ground, as he ends up literally once again losing breath in his lungs, as he cannot move his body like at all. As this is when Deku would then once again ask Bakugo how it feels, with Bakugo feeling confused as he ends up sending a look at Deku. "You still don't get it, do you?" Deku would say. "How does it feel to have all that hard work, all that effort that you did, then for all of it to just suddenly go to waste, all because of the fact that someone is stronger than you?" Deku would say to Bakugo, as this will cause Bakugo to then gain a look of realization as he realizes that this is the exact same situation that happened between his fight against Uraraka. As that will be the very last thing that Bakugo would think about, as due to the pain and fatigue of the fight, this is where he would then suddenly fall unconscious. As finally, after seeing that the fight had finally come to an end, this is when Midnight would then announce that Izuku Midoriya had been the winner of the entire UA Sports Festival. As people would be there once again shocked and silent, before once again people begin to clap. And this time the entire arena begins to clap as a way of showing appreciation for the fight and for all the fighters that tried their best. But you can still feel many of them sending certain looks at Deku, as Deku would just be there feeling the praise but not all like really caring for it like at all. As this is where we will now turn to the award ceremony. Now we will see Deku as he ends up getting awarded his first place medal, and then soon afterwards All Might then begins to give a whole speech and everything, with Deku just trying to get this over with so that way he's able to go back to Frosh. But you see, unaware to Deku though was the fact that now with the UA Sports Festival coming to an end, Deku along with the rest of the UA staff would then be hit with a large amount of controversy. As you see, the thing is, many people begin to wonder if Deku's placement was truly fair, especially with the underhanded tactics that he used throughout the entirety of the UA Sports Festival. And not only that, but due to the cheating allegations that Deku got from Monoma, this will cause many people to be very skeptical about Deku's abilities, as many of them begin to point out that Deku's abilities didn't really fit the norm for standard quirks. As this is when many people begin to make their own conspiracy theories, and this will cause UA a headache as they try their best to calm down the whole situation, while also making sure that Deku becomes unaware about it. As after all, they didn't really want the kid to feel bad or really, feel anything about this, since he really couldn't control the fact of how his quirk works, or at least what they think is a quirk. But you see, while all this was going on though, as we now change our attention to the much darker side of society, this is where we end up seeing Shigaraki as he ends up displaying the entirety of the UA Sports Festival to none other than All For One. As after making sure to show everything from the beginning to the end of it, and more precisely everything of Deku's abilities, this is when All For One would then suddenly release a smile, as he's never seen anything like it. Now the reason why Shigaraki showed this to All For One is because of the fact that he wanted to show All For One the description of the kid who had been the one to destroy his Nomu. But you see, the thing is, instead of getting angry or upset, All For One instead just smiled, as he seemed as if he was nothing more but a child looking at a new toy. As this is when he would then tell Shigaraki that it was quite alright, letting him know that Nobu can be easily replaced. But this kid? Nah, he was something special. As already deep within All For One's mind, we would then see a new scheme beginning to hatch, a new plan like no other. As this is where we then see him then smirk for the anticipating future, as this is where we now end up doing another time skip. Now flashing forward to the couple of weeks that go by, we end up seeing Deku and the rest of his classmates. As you see, after the events that end up happening at the UA Sports Festival, they gained quite a large amount of recognition, especially Deku, as he had gotten so popular by it to the point where he even has a very creepy fan club. As many girls really fell for Deku's cool and edgy look, as many of them even began to write their own series about Deku being a vampire, with Deku of course just feeling very creeped out about the whole thing and making very sure to avoid them at all times. But you see, that was not the only thing that happened, as by the time they finally were able to return back to their regular class, This is when they would then find out that they had gotten a lot of offers after the UA Sports Festival, with Deku getting quite a lot of them himself, as many of them were impressed by his abilities. Now, as Deku will be looking through them, this is when eventually he then decides to put it away, since he already knew exactly which one he was going to be working for, as he was going to go with Aizawa, mostly because of the fact that he already copied his style, and not only that, but he really looked up to him. But you see, as Deku was thinking this though, this is when finally they would then also get the opportunity to then give themselves their own hero names, as this one would actually stump Deku for a while as he begins to look back on it, wondering exactly what he should name himself. But finally, this is when suddenly he would then remember it. The name of someone who he cared very deeply about and hoped that one day he would be able to see him again. As suddenly, Deku would then write down the familiar name with a solemn look on his face as he would then get up to present it. As Midnight would then tell Deku to show off to the rest of the class, as Deku would then reveal his new hero name. The Shadow Hero, Sky Drum, he would say, as this name would actually be the very name of Deku's dragon, the one that took care of him. As almost everyone would look on in pure amazement, as this is when Midnight would then give Deku a 10 out of 10 for the name, with Deku nodding his head in acceptance, as he would then sit back with the rest of the class. As now, with all the events that happened after the UA Sports Festival coming to an end, this is where we now turn to the very internships themselves. As we see Deku for the entirety of the month spend the majority of his time with Aizawa and also Rouges, as half the time whenever he was done going on patrols with Aizawa, he would then go back home to hang out with Rouges, as the two of them would just simply play video games, eat food, and just enjoy each other's company. As it would be a very wholesome moment for both Deku and Rouges, before eventually this is when Rouges would then ask Deku if he could accompany him on patrol. Now Deku was at first very against this, since he wasn't really comfortable for allowing his best friend to go out there in danger. But this is when Rouges would then say with a full vote of confidence that he has full faith that Deku would be the one to protect him. As when Deku ends up hearing this, his heart would literally clench as he ends up immediately agreeing to take Rouges along with him. But little did Deku know was the fact that that was going to be a big mistake. As now turning to a very certain day, we will see Deku as he goes on his regular rounds of patrols, but this time along with him would be Rouges, as he would be there to watch Deku while also making sure to stay hidden so that way he doesn't get in the way. Now Deku would be there doing his typical rounds, making sure to knock out any villains that will be doing any evil deeds at night, while also making sure to report back to Aizawa. As this will continue on before eventually it would then come to an end, as both Rouges as well as Deku would then say goodbye to Aizawa as they try to return back home. But you see, as they were going back home, and as Deku was on his phone, currently right now scrolling through the latest news, as apparently the hero hunter Stain had been recently captured, as he had been captured by Endeavor and a couple other heroes, with Deku just scoffing at the news by how many people were just simply glazing Endeavor when there was no glaze needed for that guy. But as Deku was over here looking throughout the news, as he ends up talking about it with Rouges, this is when he then realizes that Rouges has been very quiet for a while. As Deku then stops, as he then turns to see that Rouges was gone. He was no longer by his side. Now Deku's eyes would then go wide, but this is when suddenly his eyes would then grow even wider as he would then be sucked into the floor. He would then try to catch himself as he would then call out to Rouges, but unfortunately it was helpless, as the next thing Deku would see would be nothing more but complete darkness. As this is where we now end up doing a quick change of scenes. As now, turning to a complete unknown location, we would then see a portal then open up as suddenly Deku would then fall, hitting the ground hard before he then collects himself. He ends up getting up as he looks around in this weird and dark area as he ends up calling out for Rouges' name, only for someone to then interrupt him. You know, it's really way too late for you to be screaming like that. Some people could be asleep, you know. A voice would then tell Deku, as this when suddenly he would then turn to look in the darkness as he ends up telling whoever is there to then reveal themselves as he can sense their presence, and Deku is not in any mood to play any games with them. As this when suddenly emerging from the darkness, holding none other than Rouges himself, will be none other than Tamura Shigaraki. As he would end up being shown appearing out of the darkness, as he would just be there casually petting the sleeping Rouges' head. But you see, the thing is, the threat was obviously very clear, as Deku had been able to see firsthand of Shigaraki's abilities, and already seeing exactly what type of position he put Rouges in, Deku knew that the threat was very clear. And to make it even worse was the fact that Kodogiri would then appear right beside Shigaraki, as he would then chuckle. Izuku Midoriya, I do believe that it's finally time for us to have a little bit of a chat, don't you think? Shigaraki would say with a very mocking amusement in his voice, as Deku would stare daggers at both him as well as Shikodagiri, as he ends up letting them know very quickly, "I'm going to kill you," as those words will be the final words that Deku would say, right before I will then pass on the rest of this what if into Xehther's hands. Thank you to Xehther as well as everyone here watching for having me here on this what if. I really hope you guys did enjoy my part, but now with that being said, I do believe it's finally time for Xehther to continue on with the story. So with that being said, I'm passing the mic to you, my dude.
Okay, so I was absolutely not expecting what it was that Samurai did with the video. Honestly, I thought it was just going to be kind of lighthearted, and then I eventually was going to have to transition into the League of Villains versus Izuku, mostly during the Forest Training Camp arc, where I usually do this stuff. But, I mean, I gotta do what I gotta do with what I'm given, right? Anyways, right after Izuku would say, "I'm gonna kill you," you would just see an explosion of aura, as normally for any other anime character, the slightest twitch of movement would cause the villain to usually pull the trigger or decay the character that they're holding hostage. But in this specific scenario, Izuku is so unbelievably filled with rage that Izuku's aura expands like crazy. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen Fairy Tail, but there's a scene where this guy that goes, "Man," like basically jumps up and puts his whole crotch in front of Rogue's face in Fairy Tail during one of the filler episodes, right? And Rogue's aura explodes so massively, you could see it from the top of the city that they're in. And that's exactly what would happen. That entire room that they were inside of would explode with a massive aura, as Frosh would be down on the ground injured because of that, and Izuku for a moment would be distracted as he would think, "Frosh, wait, I didn't." But before he can continue in his thoughts, you would just see Shigaraki on the ground beginning to get up, as Izuku quickly would close his eyes as dark scales would appear all over his body, and this ominous aura would appear, as Izuku would grab onto Shigaraki's hand and drag him into the shadowy depths. And right as he would be doing that, he would simultaneously be going, just literally destroying Kurogiri in an instant. He completely consumed him. And from this moment forward, he proceeded to absolutely dismantle Shigaraki, practically torturing him much like Itachi does when somebody's inside of their Tsukiyomi world. But when Izuku was done, he didn't drag Shigaraki back out. He left his entire deceased body inside of that realm, thinking to himself that he'll take care of that later. He'll clean out the trash, as he would walk over towards the direction of Frosh and tap him, be like, "Hey buddy, hey Frosh, come on, get up, Frosh." But Frosh would be gone. As Izuku would bust out into a bellowing cry, Izuku would start mourning so unbelievably loud over Frosh's body, eventually placing his head on Frosh's little heart. But this would lead Izuku to hearing a slight heartbeat. From this moment, instantly, Izuku would rush out as fast as he can and ask to call an ambulance. Immediately following this, an ambulance would end up arriving and taking Frosh, as they would set him up to pretty much life support, with the hospital being like, "Dude, like, we can't administer this dude. He's not even a human. You need to take him to a vet." But he's just like, "Bro, you either heal him or I'm gonna blow up your entire hospital." Like, he was not playing. So this would lead the place to pretty much hold Frosh on life support, and Izuku would be sitting there as a rage would fill Izuku like never before. Shigaraki and Kurogiri were both gone, and now it was up to All For One, who was the only one left in this entire operation. All For One, finding out about this, would quickly wonder to himself why in the world Shigaraki had to go messing with somebody like that. But regardless, what's done is done, and Shigaraki is gone. So now he has to find somebody else to carry out his plans, if you know what I'm saying. This would ultimately lead to negotiations between All For One and Overhaul, which would essentially lead into them trying to figure out a way for them to help each other out, like to benefit each other in some way, shape, or form. This would mean that once they all return back to school, after the stain situation would take place, we would end up pretty much having their finals exams going on, just like you guys would all expect. And because it's already very, very clear that All Might just straight up can't step it to this version of Izuku, I'm not even going to be covering that fight. So what happens now is we just jump straight into the Forest Training Camp, but it's my bad, guys. I'm off my game right now. Okay, let me just give myself a couple of seconds. Let me think about the story for a bit. All right, I'm ready. After this would happen, the students would end up arriving to the forest training camp where everything goes by much like a filler episode. All that happens is they all get to have fun, all but one person. Izuku, who at this moment is just so worried about Frosh that he can't concentrate on anything else. And the villains are honestly so unbelievably lucky that they're not attacking UA, because if they did, Izuku would have added a bunch more bodies to his hit list, right? But because they, obviously didn't, the whole thing is just fun. Everybody genuinely gets to train for the following week, and once they return back to UA, things are back to business as usual. This would lead the students to eventually taking the license exam, in which they would all do so. And Izuku, when he gets off of the bus and he would just look up to see what's going on, he would pretty much see one kid who kind of looks like him, like in a sense, like or the Izuku that we get in the original. Like, you guys know the guy who has the tremor ability. He can cause like earthquakes and stuff. We would have him basically appearing in front of Izuku and faking a smile. But Izuku, seeing right through him, would say that he can take himself and his BS somewhere else, as he would pretty much walk right by him, and this dude would just stare at him being like, what? Just kind of angered at the fact that he did that, wanting to hunt him the second that the exam would pretty much begin. And the second that it does, he would do just that. But Izuku, quickly going into the shadow, would go down underneath him and eventually pop right back out, before then using an uppercut right on this dude, sending him crashing away, as Izuku from this moment would proceed to suck in as much air as he possibly can before shooting 5 consecutive Dragon Slayer roars towards the direction of all the opponents around them. Each and every single one of them would get knocked out, and Class 1A would pass this entire test courtesy of Izuku Midoriya, all but Katsuki Bakugo and Todoroki, which both are too proud to, pretty much just take out knocked out people. They go off in search of their own opponents, and, they ultimately end up passing that way. But after that would take place, we would finally have the hero rescue portion, where Gang Orca would come out and try to basically show everybody what it's like to face off against a villain. Izuku, being more than prepared to face off against a villain like Gang Orca, just for this instance, would pretty much end up holding both of his hands together as darkness would begin accumulating, much like a beam of energy, and he would shoot this ball of darkness towards the direction of Gang Orca. Now, what this ball of darkness is pretty much meant to do is to suck anything near it, so it would begin dragging Gang Orca and the rest of these people closer, as Izuku, using this cluster of all these people together, like, I don't know if you guys play Clash Royale, but he almost tornadoed everyone to one spot before then using a fireball, which is another attack, and using a fire dragon. No, this is not Natsu. But by the way, if you guys do want to watch a Natsu video, I did one for Deku as well. But that's besides the point. I also did Gray, or was it for Naruto? No, I think it was for Deku. Anyways, point being, after Izuku would do this, he would shoot a darkness, a shadow. Bros, I'm so off my game. My bad. I'm distracted. I don't know what's going on with me right now, but you guys get the point. Izuku would shoot a breath attack straight towards the direction of all of the villains, knocking them all out. As after all of this would take place, we would finally find ourselves back at the school, where everybody would pretty much be informed of them pretty much having the big 3 of UA coming over to teach them a couple of things before they go into their internships. This would lead to Mirio once again wanting to face off against the entire classroom, and much like you would expect, Mirio would come out and destroy everybody except Izuku. Once Mirio was done with taking out the entirety of the class minus Bakugo, because he actually would have taken Todoroki out as well this time, this would lead to him wondering, wasn't there 24 students? But out of nowhere, Izuku comes in and shoots a breath attack towards Mirio, who quickly phases through it before jumping back up to punch Izuku, who turns into a shadow and grabs onto Mirio's leg, dragging him into the shadow realm, where he would begin beating down on Mirio, who in this specific realm is unable to use his quirk. This would lead Mirio to being absolutely stunned, as Izuku would shoot him back out, pretty beaten and battered, but nothing Mirio couldn't handle, as Mirio was extremely impressed. This kid used the rest of his classmates as a distraction and used this quirk perfectly to a T to take out somebody that has so much more experience than him and someone that would give most other people way too much trouble. This would lead Mirio to being extremely proud of Izuku, and right after this would take place, Mirio would kind of pat Izuku on the shoulder, but Izuku would just look super irritable as he would ask him like, what's wrong? This would ultimately lead Izuku to just walking away, and right after this, a couple of hours would pass as Izuku would be leaving UA or making his way towards, his dormitory, right? When suddenly, Mirio would end up pretty much making his presence known once more and informing Izuku that he has a spot open at Night Eye's agency, telling him that, it would be a great opportunity for Izuku to work with somebody, especially Night Eye, who has the quirk to see into the future. Izuku hearing this would think to himself, wait, Night Eye? As from here, he would pretty much go on to accept instantly, knowing that Night Eye has the ability to peer into the future, and Izuku has not been able to sit still ever since what happened with Frosh. He literally is thrown off of his game, kind of like I am, and because of this, Izuku knows that whether Frosh is gonna die or live, he's gonna be able to find this out through Night Eye. And so, the second that Izuku would end up arriving in front of Overhaul, he wouldn't be like, hey, accept me into your thing. He would quite literally just drop onto his knees and bow down before Night Eye, literally begging him, please, tell me what my future is. Does Frosh live? As from here, Night Eye seeing this display from the kid who he's seen during the sports festival, and from the things he's heard about Mirio, from this, like about this kid and how he took him down, stuff like that, he'd be shocked. He'd be like, sure, I'll tell you, kid. As it would be in this moment that Izuku would be told that Frosh lives. As Izuku would be like, how's that possible? But Night Eye would actually turn to him with a smile and say that today, Frosh is gonna be healed, not a day later. And Izuku hearing that, not even caring about how this is gonna happen anymore, just knowing that this dude's quirk is literally future, like seeing the future, would just be so thankful to Night Eye. After this, Sir Night Eye would tell both Mirio and Izuku to go out on a patrol, and he would say, and stop him, Mirio. As from here, Mirio not knowing what he's talking about, but thinking that this must relate somehow to what Izuku's vision was, he would pretty much end up making his way to the Hero Patrol, where a couple of minutes into it, they would actually end up discovering a little girl which would be running out of the alleyway. Izuku seeing this would question, like, what the heck? Like, what's up with her? And grabbing onto her and seeing how terrified she looked, Izuku would instantly know that something's wrong. Looking into the shadows where Overhaul would currently be at, Izuku could clearly see that Overhaul was there, and he could just feel the malice coming off of him. As Izuku turning towards Mirio would nod, before Izuku would quickly charge up a breath attack and shoot it straight towards the direction of Overhaul, which would send him crashing into the wall, as his mask would have actually been blown off due to this. Mirio would come blazing in as fast as possible before then throwing a punch square towards the face of Night Eye, sending him crashing into a trash can, as it would be one of those really big green ones, you know what I mean? He hits his head and pretty much ricochets onto the floor, completely unconscious. As Izuku seeing this would then go on to ask Mirio who this guy is, and Mirio goes on to say that that's Overhaul, a villain they've been trying to stop for months now. From here, Izuku would go on to ask Eri what happened with him, and she would just pretty much explain the situation. Now, he'd been using her quirk and turning time back on her and destroying her, trying to take advantage of her quirk, which can rewind things. And Izuku hearing that would think, that must be how it happens. As from this moment, we would pretty much end up having Izuku like telling Eri if she wouldn't mind doing him a small favor with a smile on his face, something that he usually doesn't do. Eri would end up following him to the hospital, where once there, Izuku would say, hey, you think you can use your quirk on my buddy? He accidentally got hurt during a villain attack. As Eri seeing this would say, yeah, I don't see why not. And so she would go on to touch him and use her quirk, as Frosh would literally begin getting healed. But it would be in this moment that Frosh and Izuku seeing this would go on to pretty much hold on to Frosh, because she was literally rewinding him far too much, which would ultimately lead to Izuku and Frosh both actually being reverted 4 years in time, which would lead Izuku to being even younger than he already was. Like, mind you, Izuku in this part was 15, but now he went right back to being 11, which pretty much means that Frosh is a lot younger, which Izuku's happy for because, you know, his life expectancy, actually, he's an Xehther, he's not a cat, so his life expectancy is probably longer than Izuku's, but point being, the dude literally got rewinded by Eri, and they're like, okay, like, how do we reverse this? But it's just like, bro, you don't. Like, you literally don't reverse this. And so Izuku literally stayed at UA, and this whole situation had to be broken down to them. They're all like, dude, like, you're 11 now? And Izuku's like, I guess so. Bakugo would start laughing at Deku, being like, like, how did you let that happen? But Izuku would say, honestly, I'd do it over again if it meant Frosh was safe. As from here, you know, like, Izuku, because of this being the case, would pretty much end up having to stay in school for extra years, and he would continue learning alongside Class 1A. As, you know, the situation would be explained to all the rest of the classroom and all of the teachers, and Izuku would be allowed to permanently stay at UA for the next 5 years, being told that when Izuku turns 16, he will be allowed to be a pro hero. And Izuku would just nod before saying, it is what it is. At the end of the day, I mean, he can always just be Aizawa's sidekick until then. And Nezu, hearing this and knowing that Izuku definitely has the capabilities of being out there on the front lines, would decide that that's probably the best for everybody. And so this would pretty much lead to Izuku and Frosh just kind of chilling, you know what I mean? Until eventually, All For One, I don't know when he would strike. Like, if something like this was to take place, All For One is just one of those characters that is so unbelievably unpredictable that you just never know when he's gonna strike, what card he's gonna pull next. And because of the element of, like, what's gonna happen, I'm kind of just at a loss in terms of, like, okay, like, what happens now? You know what I mean? Which pretty much just leads me to saying, like, I think that that's probably where it ends. Like, I'm not too sure. But ladies and gentlemen, that's not it for me. Like, if you guys want to keep hearing me covering one of the twin dragon slayers, then go check out my boy's Samurai's channel. He's going to be doing What If Deku Was Sting's Reincarnation. So we did the twin shadow dragons as our first collab. And honestly, I think that his video was probably better than mine. I'm not going to lie. Like, the storyline we ended up making was so much better. So genuinely, go show a bunch of love and support to his channel. I know he's gonna kill it with his part, and you guys are gonna be able to hear me cover the UA Sports Festival and the Stain arc. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I love each and every single one of you guys. It has been your boy Xehther, and I am out. Peace.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die! That wasn't the line, Kachan! Whatever!